Hello, everyone. I'm Marlon Primes. I'm a partner at Brennan Manna and Diamond in the Cleveland office, and I help lead our business and tort litigation group. I'm also a retired assistant U.S. attorney. I am proud to have our Black History Month program, which is a coordinated effort between the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Norman S. Minor Bar Association, which is the largest association of African American lawyers and judges in Ohio, and my current employer, Brennan Manna and Diamond. We have a real treat for everyone. Our guest speaker is certainly no stranger to Northeastern Ohio, and that's Judge Solomon Oliver. Delante, who is the president of the Norman Minor Bar Association, and I will be moderating this session, and we'll be asking Judge Oliver a series of questions regarding Black History Month. And if we have time at the end, we'll entertain some questions. Before we do that, we want to introduce our distinguished speaker. First of all, Judge Oliver was born and raised in Alabama. He graduated from the College of Worcester in Worcester, Ohio. He received his master's degree from Case Western Reserve University, and he graduated from New York University Law School. Judge Oliver clerked for Judge William Hastie, who is a big part of African American history, as he was the first African American to serve as an Article III judge. And he also served as a chief judge of the Federal District Court, United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. Judge Oliver also served as the chief of the Civil Division of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Cleveland, and he was the first appellate chief of the U.S. Attorney's Office. Judge Oliver went on, following his tenure at the U.S. Attorney's Office, to serve as Associate Dean at Cleveland State University College of Law. He was nominated by President Bill Clinton to serve on the Federal District Court in 1994, and he became the second African American to serve as the Chief Judge of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Ohio. Delante will talk about the many awards that Judge Oliver has received. We have Delante on? Okay. While waiting for Delante, just a few awards that Judge Oliver has received. He received the Norman S. Minor Bar Association's highest award, the Trailblazers Award. He also has received the highest award from the American Bar Association, the Robert J. Kutak Award, for significant contributions to the bench and bar. And he also received the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association's Richard W. Pogue Award for excellence in community leadership and engagement. And as I said before, my name is Marlon Primes, and I'm a past president of the Norman S. Minor Bar. I'm a partner at Brennan Manna and Diamond, and a retired assistant U.S. attorney in the Northern District of Ohio. Delante is the current president of the Norman S. Minor Bar Association and is trying to join us. And he's also the chief ethics officer for the city of Cleveland. Okay, go ahead, Delante. Is Delante here?
Yeah, I'm on.
Okay, go ahead. If you want to introduce yourself.
No, I think you've done a great job.
Okay, excellent. All right. Judge Oliver, thank you so much for participating in our program today. To get started, can you talk about what is Black History Month and why is it celebrated?
Sure. Thanks, Marlon. Thanks, Delante, and thank you all who are being part of this program. I appreciate being invited to be a part of it. The Black History Week, when I was a child, was celebrated, and that was a joyous time for all of us in the segregated South. It was a time when we thought about our heroes. So it was Joe Louis and Jackie Robinson, a lot of sports heroes who had broken through in the decade before. And also we had Mary McLeod Bethune, who was a famous African-American female who made contributions in education and in, also in politics. We really celebrated our successes as a race, and it was necessary because there were so many obstacles in our way, so many in our path. So that's when I became familiar with Black History Week at that time. It was later changed to be Black History Month. I think there are really a number of good reasons to celebrate Black History Month. One is, again, to hold up the achievements of African Americans and to celebrate them. That's both within the race in terms of African Americans celebrating them and gaining kind of momentum and kind of celebrating ourselves. But it's more than that. Black history is really part of American history, and so we need to fill in the gaps. We need to also make sure that the larger society understands the contributions of African Americans. This is a very diverse society that we have, and our strength is diversity. And so this is just one group in our society, but it's one whose history has been not fully revealed. And so I think that those are the reasons. It's so that we celebrate as African Americans our achievements, and it gives momentum to the members of our race, including our young children. They see examples of success, but it's also part of American history. And we fill in the gaps, and also others in society come to know and understand the achievements of African Americans as part of the history of America.
And Judge Oliver, we've obviously made a lot of progress in the country. We still have a ways to go. But in light of that progress, do you still think that law firms, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and other people in the United States should still celebrate Black History Month today? And if so, why?
I think we have made a lot of progress, and you'll hear about some of that progress when you hear about my background and the circumstances under which I was raised in Alabama. So there's no question we've made a lot of progress. But I think there's still a need for African Americans to understand their history, the achievements they made to American history. And I think that's important because for many years, and even today to some extent, the history of African Americans is not completely told. And there were reasons for that, going back to slavery and thereafter. And so that's important. I think we need to do that. I think just also because we do have a diverse society, we need to learn about each other. And so it's not just African Americans that we need to learn about, but we need to learn about all of the groups in our society. And I think that there's special reason because of our unique history relative to African Americans to celebrate this and to celebrate it continuously. I don't see any need to stop doing that anytime, but certainly not anytime in the near future. It's a wonderful time. It's a celebration, is what it is, so it's a time that I think we can all be happy about, not just African Americans but others. It's not just a celebration by African Americans. This is a celebration which all can participate, and all are invited to participate. It's just one aspect of American history.
Judge Oliver, you talked a little bit about growing up in Alabama. Can you tell us or share with us where you grew up exactly in Alabama, and just some thoughts of your experience coming up, particularly during the modern civil rights movement?
Sure. So I was born in Bessemer, Alabama. That's about 8 miles west of Birmingham. I was born in 1947. I'm not ashamed to say, so it's been quite a while. And I grew up there with both my parents and 5 brothers and 4 sisters. There were 10 of us. And everything in Bessemer was segregated from top to bottom, as you might imagine. Separate water fountains, to the extent that there was a water fountain set aside for Blacks. Separate doctors' offices. The schools were totally segregated. The facilities were inadequate in terms of libraries and recreation facilities. All the things you read about in terms of the limitations by law that were placed on African Americans. In terms of jobs, We were limited in what we could do. I've always said that if there was any job a white person wanted during that time, then it was one that I could not have. We could not be bus drivers. We could not get more than the menial jobs in the steel mills. We could not be police officers. We were not part of the government. And yet Bessemer had a black population of about 55% African American. So that's the kind of society I grew up in. A lot happened during time I was growing up. Let's take 1963, for example. 1963, that was a time when Martin Luther King came to Birmingham. And at that time, he and Reverend Ralph Shuttlesworth began what was called the Birmingham Campaign. It was a nonviolent campaign of marches and sit-ins against racism and segregation. And Dr. King and the others were jailed. And then in April,
And African American students at that
many of you have heard of so-called Bull Connor. Maybe you haven't because it's been a long time now. But that was a sheriff, police chief there in Birmingham. He turned the dogs and fire hoses loose on the children who were marching and others who were marching. You may have seen pictures of that, which is depicted what happened there historically. But that's the kind of thing that was going on. That same year, George Wallace, who was the governor of Alabama, stood in the schoolhouse door, that is, the door at Foster Auditorium at the University of Alabama, in an attempt to prevent the registration of two black students, James Hood and Vivian Malone. And basically what happened there was that the Attorney General of the United States had a representative there. It was the Deputy Attorney General. And he had to deputize or federalize the National Guard to cause the governor to step aside so that those students could enter the University of Alabama. That's 1963. And that action by Wallace was really a fulfillment of a promise that he had made when he was elected not too long ago, maybe 1 year before. And many of you know what he said then. He says, I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny. I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. That happened in 1963. Now, there's also the March on Washington in 1963. And then also, most of you have heard that there was the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, where 4 young girls were killed. And that church was bombed by 4 cowardly Ku Klux Klansmen. And so that happened in 1963. Those girls were killed. So much happened during the period of time that I was growing up. I was about 11th grade. I can just tell you one more incident, which was a personal one. I was traveling to a church convention through Georgia to Florida with 2 deacons. And we stopped at a gas station. There was only one restroom. And quite frankly, I wasn't thinking about the segregated circumstances of the South. As I started to use that restroom, there was a young man who came in, white guy, and started hitting me and so forth. It took me a while to understand that he was upset that I was using the only restroom at that gas station. And when we came out from that gas station, we're leaving the gas station, the attendant said,
country.
Sure that we never stopped when we came back through. And basically he indicated that he thought we were sent there by Robert Kennedy to integrate the town and also to integrate those facilities. So that's a personal experience that I had. I'll be quick, but there was 1965 was another important year in terms of protests. And most of you heard the Selma to Montgomery March. Well, the first march had to be aborted because when they got to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the sheriff there, Sheriff Clark, who was notorious, the Dallas County Sheriff, started to beat the marchers and so forth. And John Lewis, who was with SNCC, was one of the leaders, and you've heard about how he was beat. beaten. But they gave it another try a couple of weeks later, and they were successful with the march from Selma to Montgomery in respect to voting rights. So that's just kind of some of what was happening in the 60s as I grew up, Delonte. And I wanted to take a little bit of time to kind of just set out those things and highlight them.
Yeah, no, very, very much appreciated. And I think it's safe to say that, you have certainly seen and experienced a lot, which really takes me to my next question. When we currently,
And some of it was very good.
what, if anything, should we learn or take away from that time period that you just discussed?
Well, I think it reminds us of where America started and some of the efforts that had to be made to move America along move America closer to the notion of all persons being equal. We know the words of the Declaration, and we know that when the country started out, that though it had an ideal that all, I guess, men were created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that we've had to fight from that time to move toward that ideal so that all groups, ethnic groups and females and all groups are able to participate and to share equally in opportunities and the other fruits of our democracy. And so I think that it's important that people understand that history, where we've come. I think it's also important to see kind of how we still have a lot to do. And this is not just an African American task, but it's a task for all of us, as I tried to emphasize before. And so I just think it's very important that not just African Americans, but the nation as a whole concentrate on its history and also not just on its promise, but on its shortcomings and its promise. So I do think that the law firms, the government institutions have to take stock. Do they have a diverse working environment? Do they hire broadly from all races and people of different backgrounds? And they have to come to understand the perspective, different perspectives that people can bring when you're problem solving, when you're litigating. You can get insight from people who have different backgrounds from yourself. So I think it's absolutely critical. I think it's critical to the firms and to government institutions, but I think it's critical to those who have been left out. We still have great gaps in terms of where we think things should be relative to minorities, including African Americans. That's in the field of law. You look at partnerships, associates and partners and firms, and some of the governmental institutions. I think we all ought to be on the lookout for trying to diversify ourselves, because it's the right thing to do and provides opportunity, but also because it provides the perspectives that are provided by a diverse workforce are going to be a positive contribution to institutions.
Thank you. Just a question for you. You spoke about the historical context and why that's important. One of the conversations that has been at the forefront of the nation, right, has been around, critical race theory and whether that should be
There's a lot of pressure
in schools. And, why should we remember and study, the events of the past, and kind of what's your response to those who say that we should just get over what's happened in the.
Well, I can make a brief comment here, because I don't think I need to take much time. I'm not entering into a political debate. I don't think I'm engaged in politics. I have no question. I have no qualms about saying directly, however, that I think it's important that, as I've said, the African Americans learn about their own history, but that the country learns about the history of all of its citizens. And it's important to understand the history also because it can give us great insight into some of what is going on today. Uh, the effects of slavery are still being felt. We moved through Jim Crow period. We've made a lot of progress. We were hoping to make more than we've made, but there are still great deficits, great disparities in the circumstances of African Americans by comparison to the larger population. But I guess I would just say, in regard to African American history or Black history, that what the poet said, we too sing America. We too sing America. And so in order to have that song fully heard, we've got to understand the voices that can give us that insight into the history, that Black history. No, I think we've got to continue to make sure that African American history is part of American history, and that the truth be told in regard to history, period, related topics. And that was
that you talked about growing up in Alabama, and obviously your family's there. Can you talk about your decision to leave Alabama and venture to Ohio and attend the College of Worcester? What was your thought process in making that decision?
It was a complex one. I had grown up in Alabama. I hadn't been outside of the South very much. I did have some relatives in Cleveland, grandmother, uncle and aunt on my father's side, and aunt on my mother's side. So it was the only place outside of Alabama that I knew anything about. And I really didn't know that much about Cleveland, but I've been to Cleveland a few times. But I started at college I started out at a college in Alabama called Miles College. It was a historically Black college. My parents had not had the opportunity to go to college. There were 10 of us, and they wanted all of us to have that opportunity. We didn't have resources to pay to go to college away from Alabama. And even when I started in college in 1965, the state colleges that were traditionally white were still not hospitable places to go. So University of Alabama at Birmingham, for example, I don't think they had any Black students by the time I started in 65. So I started out at this historically Black college. Fortunately, this college was, though poor, very forward thinking in terms of its leadership. And they developed relationships with Harvard. There would be the dean of students coming every summer to work in a basic skills workshop. They developed an exchange program with Dartmouth. And then they had a College of Worcester graduate who was teaching French. And she was my French teacher my first year. And she just harassed me, continuously to think about going to the College of Worcester. They wanted to diversify their student body. This was in the middle of the civil rights movement. And so the civil rights movement had an impact on institutions outside of the South. Colleges started to understand, even in the North, that diversity was a positive thing and that they should move to do something. And so she pushed and pushed, and I ignored. But I had an opportunity to go to Harvard summer school after my freshman year because of the connection that Miles had with Harvard. And so I did, and I was taking 2 courses there. And during that summer, in July or maybe almost August, she wrote me a special delivery letter saying, call the dean of the College of Worcester and let him know, call him collect and let him know whether you're interested in going. And it was a dilemma for me. I was doing well at home, in college. I hadn't been outside of the South. Other than that summer, I was at Harvard. And so I did call the dean, like she said. And the secretary there, when she heard there was a collect call from Solomon Oliver, they said, will you accept the charges? She says, I doubt it. And so I thought maybe I'd be home free. But when the dean heard that, he jumped and grabbed the phone and came on to the phone. He encouraged me to apply. And I gave him every excuse I could as to why I wouldn't be able to do it, especially because my parents couldn't afford it. And he told me, just apply, let us worry about that. And so I did. And they gave me, a tremendous scholarship and covered essentially everything. I did have a job that was part of that. And so I came to the College of Worcester in 1966, sight unseen. I'd never seen the college, so I never visited it, but only had read about it. So that's how I came north to college, and that's where I remained until I graduated.
And Judge Oliver, when you were in college in the 1960s, many of those that are on the line today perhaps weren't born, and they see news accounts and videos of that very difficult time in our country that saw the assassination of MLK, RFK, riots in cities around the country, including Cleveland. In the context of Black History Month, can you talk about what it was like being a college student in the 1960s?
Well, in some ways, I guess it was like a college student any other time in terms of camaraderie and so forth. But it was a special time in many ways because of what was going on in the nation as a whole and in the world at the time. There were war protests, as you might imagine. There's also, in light of the civil rights movement, blacks and whites and others who embraced kind of that movement, wanted to be a part of it. I think that at the College of Worcester, even though it didn't have a large African American population, but it had one which was growing, there were people there who were open to trying to make changes both in that institution and in the world at large. I remember coming up to Cleveland, the busload of students leafleting on the west side when Carl Stokes was running for mayor. And I remember going to sleep that night, not sure that he won. And I woke up the next morning to the announcement that he'd actually won the mayor's race. So that was one. We were fighting in the context of the college, for example, to get more Black students, to get Black professors, because there was a dearth, almost none. Those kinds of things. And so I think we felt that the nation was on the move, that we were moving in the right direction, that there was a commitment to full citizenship. And so people were fighting and involved in those movements, and discussions were being held in hallways. And so there was an excitement that was palpable during that period of time. It was an exciting time. Not without some frustration, and I'm not saying that everybody was on that in that movement, but there was a sense at that time that things were not only getting better, they're going to get much better, and that there was no limit to possibilities in regard to change. That was kind of that tone, that feel.
And Judge Oliver, what should we learn or remember about that time period when you were in college in the 1960s in the context of Black History Month?
I just think for young people today and for people in general, that I just think we need to kind of recapture some of the spirit that we had. John Lewis died not too long ago. He was one of the fighting spirits during the early period through SNCC, and of course later as a congressperson. And he talked about good trouble. And I think we need to think about that and take that to heart, that in our society, we're going to always need people who are willing to take some risk for the good. And I think that's important. And we're never going to have a perfect society, and we certainly don't have one now. We have a lot of things to celebrate, but we have a lot of change that needs to be made. And so I think we ought to be change agents. I think that the way we were in the 60s, and I think we ought to verbalize how important it is to be committed to the broad ideals of our society. We are not there, and we may never get there, but we ought to be always struggling. That's why they call it a civil rights struggle. Always struggling to get there, to full equality, to full participation. That's what I think.
And African American students at that time period certainly faced a lot of challenges being in college in the 1960s. What should we remember about the struggles and sacrifices of your fellow African American students during that time period, not only at Worcester, but across the country?
Well, I just think we were on the spot, and some of it was very good. But as we integrated institutions, for example. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, the screen just blinked off. That's why I asked. As we integrate institutions, there's a lot of pressure put on us. We were students like everybody else, but in some ways we were called upon to be the experts. We were in class about race and about other related topics, and that was tough. We also had to take responsibility, as I said before, about trying to push institutions toward change, toward getting more minority students, toward getting minority faculty, toward moving toward integrating the curriculum in terms of course. Part of that at Worcester and served on a committee that developed a framework for the first Black Studies program there at the college. So that those are the kinds of sacrifices. But we with that came opportunity. We were now getting a chance to go to medical school, to go to law school, to get the kind of training in those places as those institutions opened up as well. And so it was exciting. It was pressure, but there was opportunity.
Judge, just good segue. So you graduate Worcester. At what point did you decide to go to law school and pursue a legal career, and why'd you do it?
A lot of people have asked me this question a number of times, and I've answered it different ways. I never knew precisely that I wanted to go to law school before probably my last year in undergrad. I had an uncle who had been in the war. He wanted to be a lawyer. He didn't have an opportunity to become a lawyer, so he was always talking about that. And I have a younger brother that's 2 years younger who really took that to heart. He is a lawyer, but I wasn't sure. I just knew that I wanted to do something
legal career, and
that meant maybe a PhD in some field or or become a lawyer. And there are not many African Americans in either with PhDs or as a lawyer. And so I kind of had that dual thing going. I've said sometimes that, when I was told in Georgia, as we were leaving that gas station, that Robert Kennedy had sent us down there, that perhaps that was a seed also. The idea being that if they felt that strongly about the Attorney General of the United States and what he was doing, and they thought he was doing to integrate, perhaps law, since he was a lawyer, Robert Kennedy, perhaps that might be a field that I should go into. But I wanted to, when I decided to do law and chose not at that point to go into a PhD program, I just felt like there's some good I could do in law, in representing people and institutions to bring about equality. I didn't have any specific thoughts in mind, but more generally that the lawyers can do some good. And there were some kinds of areas of law that I would want to avoid. But that was really kind of my my thought process. I did know something about NAACP Legal Defense Fund and the Black lawyers who waged the legal battle to end segregation, including pushing in ways that brought about the Brown versus Board of Education decision. But I didn't know the full scope of that.
So you also had a very unique experience of clerking for Judge William Hastie, the first Black federal judge. What was that experience like?
Well, it was a tremendous experience, and it has really served really to, I would say, served in a way to undergird everything I've done in the law since. Judge William Hastie is a historic figure. He went to Dunbar High School, all-Black high school in DC, was #1 in his class, knew precisely one of the best liberal arts colleges in the United States, and he was #1 in his class. He went to Harvard Law School, and he was one of the editors of the Harvard Law Review, which is very prestigious and hard position to get. But he was well-rounded. He was a track man when he was at Amherst, and quite good at it. He was also at Amherst with Charles Drew, famous African-American who kind of invented the way of using blood plasma, in effective ways. Amherst had a very small number of African-American students, but they had a number of them historically. And so that's what Hastie's background was. Hastie was a district court judge in the Virgin Islands. He was Assistant Secretary of War during World War II, and he was there to help integrate the armed forces and make sure it happened. When it didn't, he resigned, and he was given NAACP's top medal, Spingarn Medal, for that. He was the dean of Howard Law School, and he was there during a period of time when Howard Law Schools kind of served as a laboratory for developing legal arguments that would result in eventually the dismantling of segregation in the United States, legal segregation. And they were teaming up with the NAACP in doing that. And so Hastie had that kind of background. He was appointed by President Truman in 1949 to the U.S. Third Circuit Court of Appeals. And though he had been a district judge, a territorial judge, that's not an Article III judge. So he was the first Article III judge in the United States when he was appointed to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. So that's his background. He had been committed to civil rights. He was a mentor of Thurgood Marshall, and so he had argued some of the early cases before Brown versus Board in the Supreme Court himself. One series of cases involved restrictive covenants. Another one had to do with interstate discrimination, interstate travel, and so that was his background. So it was just I didn't know about clerkships when I came out of law school, and I went back to College of Worcester to do some undergraduate teaching. I was invited to do that, and I was advised by a friend who was head of the National Conference of Black Lawyers, who would come out to Worcester to speak, that if I wanted to get back into law, which I wanted to do, though I enjoyed teaching at Worcester immensely, that clerking might be a good way to do that. And he had clerked for Constance Baker Motley, who was the first African-American female judge on the court, Southern District of New York. And so I started to look into clerkships, and I applied to a number of them. And I was invited by Hastie to come out to Philadelphia for an interview. To use his words, he says, "Something may come of it." And so I went out for the interview, and something did come of it. I got the clerkship. And it just gave me a perspective that I would not have had without it. I think it gives you a sense of competence, confidence, and I think that it opens up my eyes to possibilities that I probably could not have imagined in the law. And so that's it was great working with him, drafting opinions for him, but mainly just getting his perspective on early civil rights movement and on just a host of things. It was took that to heart. He is a lawyer.
And what would
Judge Oliver, go ahead, Delonte.
Yeah, I was just one last thing, regarding Judge Hasty. What would you say is his legacy, right? You talked about the number of different things that he's done in his career, but what would you say is his legacy is, and kind of how it relates to Black History Month?
Well, his legacy is just and it's multifaceted. I think when I speak about his legacy as it related to being part of the group of lawyers that developed a strategy that led to Brown. We don't have time to go through all of that, but there were a series of cases that were systematically chosen that led up to Brown. They had to look at the Supreme Court they're dealing with. They had to look at the separate but equal doctrine, and they had to attack that just step by step. And he was part of that strategy. But he went on the court in '49, so it was before Brown was decided. That I wanted to. He has a legacy as the first African American Article III judge, and how he carried out his responsibilities there. And he has a legacy through myself and the other clerks he had. We'll talk a little bit about more about that hopefully in a few minutes. But that's part of his legacy is through his clerks, through me, and I have some thoughts about that.
Judge Oliver, in addition to working for Judge Hasty, you also had an opportunity to work for another history maker, and that was U.S. Attorney James Williams, who is the third African American to serve as U.S. Attorney.
Thought was important.
How should we remember him and his legacy in the context of Black History Month?
That's correct. I worked for Jim Williams. I actually worked for two of the three Black U.S. attorneys in the history of Northern Ohio. I was actually hired by Fred Coleman in 1976, and he was by political party a Republican, and most of the people hired by that office during that time were people who were approved by the Republican Party. This was before Jimmy Carter came in and changed things so that assistant attorneys were considered professionals who were not subject to being fired every time the administrations changed. That came with Jimmy Carter. Before that, when the parties changed, a lot of the assistant attorneys would change. So in any event, Fred Coleman hired me. He didn't send me down to the party, or I wouldn't have passed muster. But he hired me, and he was African American, and then later a judge here in Cleveland. And then Jim Williams came into office during the Carter administration, and I was there. I had been there for about 2 years, so we didn't have really a lot of veterans left in that office. And so I talked to him about the possibility of becoming a civil chief, and he made me civil chief. He also hired a very diverse group of lawyers. He was not doing it based on party. And so he hired some law clerks from some of the judges, but he hired a very diverse office, and including a good number of African Americans and many of the lawyers, but especially I can remember some of the African Americans who went on in other positions later and distinguished themselves, like Carol Watts Allen, who became the first female safety director of the city of Cleveland, Carla Moore, who became a judge on the Ninth District Court of Appeals here in Ohio, Randy Baxter, who became the bankruptcy judge here in Ohio, and there were others. Vern Armstrong, who became a magistrate judge on the U.S. District Court. All of those persons, including myself, were hired by Jim Williams and worked under him. So he left a legacy of diversity, of competence, and he really, I think, was the one who transformed the U.S. Attorney's Office into the modern and good office that it is today.
Judge, let's switch gears for a second and talk about your career as a federal judge. And so if you can, I guess, share with us what made you decide that you wanted to take the bench yourself, and just kind of walk us through what was going through your mind.
Yeah, I don't think I have to take too long on that, but I could say this as a lawyer. And so I dream that I would be a judge because I knew that I didn't want to run for office. I admired many of the judges I knew who ran for office, but I was just not oriented to doing the kinds of things that would get me elected to office, or oriented to facing the electorate after I made tough decisions as a judge. And so I thought my only chance for that office or other office, such as U.S. Attorney, would be if there was Democratic administration. And then it also would have to be at a time when I was kind of in the middle of my career. So when President Clinton came into office, it just dawned on me that if I was going to have any chance to become a federal judge, then that was probably the best shot. I didn't know whether I had any real shot at all, but every time I talked to persons like George White, who was the first African-American judge here in Cleveland, I got a positive response. To Congressman Stokes, Louis Stokes, I got a positive response. So for my pastor, Otis Moss, who was working with Martin Luther King during the Civil Rights Movement, positive response. And so I was encouraged to push ahead. And so since Metzobama and Glenn put together a team of their staff, and they interviewed a number of us, and I was able to emerge from that. And so that's the background. That's what happened.
And so as a federal judge, you've hired the most diverse group of law clerks of any federal judge in the history of the Northern District of Ohio. And some of your law clerks have become federal judges themselves, and others have gone on to have other outstanding legal careers. What advice would you give us about finding, training, and retaining a diverse legal force or legal workforce?
So let me just first say a little bit about Black lawyers and then clerks, period. So African Americans constitute about 13% of the U.S. population. Black lawyers constitute about 5% of lawyers. And then in terms of law students, African Americans constitute about 8%. When you look at federal clerkships, African Americans constitute only about 4%. And the 4% is the smallest number of all of the ethnic groups and all of the groups, including all of the other ethnic groups and the pool at large. So it's about 4%. So you can see there are not a large number of African Americans becoming federal clerks. I've had about 42 clerks, and just slightly more than half of them, just slightly more than half, have been African American. Of course, I've had them. Robert Kennedy has on African American. That is a large number by comparison to not just judges in our court, but across the nation. And I'm especially proud of clerks that we have. They've been successful in a wide range of things. one of my clerks just got appointed to be a district judge in Northern District of Ohio. I'm sorry, Northern District of Illinois. Excuse that. And Lindsay Jenkins, she's a Cleveland Marshall graduate. My clerks have come though from law schools all across the country, local ones, other law schools in Ohio, but also from Columbia and NYU, Georgetown and Michigan and so forth. But but I've hired them from Cleveland Marshall and Ohio State and Toledo, and so I wherever I can find outstanding clerks, I'll hire them. I have another former law clerk who has gotten through the Senate in terms of request to be a district judge in the Southern District of New York. So she's awaiting a floor vote now. That's all that's left. And Jessica Clark is her name. She went to Ohio State University, and so I'm proud of them. And I have two of my former clerks who are magistrate judges on our court here. But it's not just judges. We're trying to bring a holistic perspective to every area of law. That's hopefully what they can bring. I have one clerk that recently, African American female, that recently became a partner in Jones Day's San Francisco office. And I have clerks who've been in the Civil Rights Division and are in the Civil Rights Division, Department of Justice. And I have them working at the Southern Poverty Law Center. I have them working in immigration. They're working all over. And the thing I feel good about is that I think they are good human beings who are very competent. And I always encourage them, wherever they are, to just think about their job and what they're doing in a broad perspective and not in a very narrow way, so that they can realize, some satisfaction out of the practice of law. So I'm very proud. I'm very proud of them. And all I can say is they were good at the start. If I have any thing to do with their success at all, it's being able to provide an opportunity and to recognize talent, because they were very good at the start. And so what they're doing now is a continuation of the track record they already had.
Mm-hmm. So let's see. We have about 5 minutes left. We actually have a question in the chat, like the polls, and then I'll toss it back to Marlon to close us out. But question in the chat is while fighting for change, what did you keep in the forefront of your
Since he was a lawyer, Robert Kennedy.
Motivated to keep going as you faced roadblocks and adversities?
So I had a good foundation from the start with two parents and other relatives who just kind of taught us that, we were good as anybody, that if we were given a chance, we could succeed. And when the world was kind of putting us down and saying we were nobody, they gave us a sense that we were somebody. That included teachers that I had. So I think there was an orientation that I already had coming from my heritage in the South, and in the context of having 5 brothers and 4 sisters, and we were all very close. I just had cheerleaders all the way, and so that's really kind of the foundation. I think to have like-minded people, to have friends or relatives or others, and you can develop some of that yourself by being around the right people. I think that's what you need, some comrades.
Well, thank you so much, Judge Oliver. We certainly appreciate your involvement in today's program and your words of wisdom about the importance of Black History Month. We want to thank you for your time, not only for today's program, but all else that you do to support our community, particularly the field trip that we've done annually pre-COVID, where we brought high school students to your chambers and had a mock suppression hearing. Hopefully we'll be able to to resume that program once the COVID pandemic officially ends in May. And those that may be interested in that program for next school year, please reach out to Delonte and I. I also want to thank Delonte and the Norman S. Minor Bar Association for co-sponsoring this program. As many of you know, the Norman S. Minor Bar is the largest association of African American lawyers and judges in Ohio. And I want to thank my former employer, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Ohio, where both Judge Oliver and I worked. And I want to thank my current employer, Brennan Manna and Diamond, for also being a part of today's program. So again, thank you so very much for your remarks, Judge Oliver, and thank those that have been able to participate and listen to today's program as well. Thank you again, everyone, and have a good remainder of Black History Month.
Thank you.
Thanks, Judge.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Marlon.
Okay, thanks, Delonte. Thanks, Judge Oliver.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. And like I say, this is a time of celebration. And we invite all to join, because this is One America, and African Americans' contribution is being celebrated now. But we should celebrate all groups in America, and I think we work best when we do that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, everyone.